Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our fourth of five sessions on conscious leadership and how all of us at this time of global duress can activate the superpower within all of us, not only individually, but collectively. As we begin today, I want to note that this session is the 800th session of Humanity Rising. We started back on the 22nd of May, 2020, in the depths of the pandemic, if you recall, when all of us were under some form of lockdown and we were all running around wearing masks and keeping social distance and completely bewildered that we were caught up in an extraordinarily strange and frightening and isolating event for the human family. And one of the things that we decided to do at Ubiquity was simply, in a time of isolation, to create a global Zoom broadcast completely for free, so that people from all over the world, ended up over 130 countries being represented, could just join in and from wherever they were, just talk about what was going on in the pandemic, what their concerns were, but also how their visions and their aspirations for a better humanity could also be articulated during that time of duress. I want to make a special note of gratitude, not only to all of you who have been listening to us and participating in the chats and in the after chat groups, and all the people who have been so deeply caring and involved. Also want to note a number of the staff at Ubiquity, in particular, my very good friend and colleague, Rick Buckley, who was one of the first people I discussed the possibility with, also Georg Bach, Stan Pokris, and others, Matt Robertson. There was a whole group of us who tirelessly, day by day, the entire first year, we were convening 7 days a week. And then starting in 2021, we scaled down a bit because we began to realize that what we were offering was something that was important, whether we were in a pandemic or not, because the most important endeavor in which humanity needs to engage at this time is to come together to enable humanity to rise. So that's why we picked the name Humanity Rising. It was actually Peter Mary, one of our co-founders, who dreamed the name. And that has been our tagline and logo since then, as we seek to transform conversations that matter into actions that make a difference. Today, I want to make a very important and special note as we consider on our fourth day the requirements of conscious leadership, because context shapes content, and the content we need to develop is being shaped probably the most fundamentally by global warming and climate that is now spinning out of control. And I want to just note that today, the European Union Copernicus Climate Change Service, one of the most preeminent scientific bodies in the entire world, monitoring the climate, announced that this year, 2023, will be the hottest year on record going back 125,000 years. And I want everybody to just take that in. This year is the hottest year on planet Earth for 125,000 years. The species Homo sapiens was barely out of the trees at that time. And here we are, the human race, generating so much industrial heat and global warming that we're setting a record that almost defies credulity. And the deeper truth that was noted by this group is that this year will mark a 1.7 degrees Celsius rise above pre-industrial levels. And what that means is that we are now moving to a point of no return, because climate scientists have been telling us for many decades, as temperatures have been rising, that if we would just keep the warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, we may be able to remedy the situation. And this year we're going to be hitting 1.7. And corollary data point is that fossil fuel, which is the primary cause of global warming, is now at record levels. So the world, as it's become preoccupied with war, conflict in multiple regions around the world, has essentially dispensed, in terms of any kind of collective endeavor, any remedial action on climate change. And now we're breaking through that threshold that climate scientists tell us is the ceiling beyond which we cannot go if we want in any way to remedy the world ecology in relationship to climate change. So as we gather today, as we've been noting all week and previously, we humans are in a great crisis, and embedded in that crisis is the most extraordinary opportunity in the history of humankind. And therefore, as the crisis deepens, those of us who care so passionately about the human future and the planetary future need to come together to seize the opportunity as consciously, as compassionately, and as caringly as we possibly can, so that we can both individually and collectively provide the kind of leadership, both in terms of inspiration and also in terms of actions that will catalyze a critical mass of humanity to do what needs to be done to preserve our world unto our children, unto the seventh generation. So those are some remarks that I just wanted to bring into our deliberations today. But again, in the spirit of deep gratitude that after 800 sessions, we are still together, we're still going strong, and our momentum is such that Ubiquity University and our 350 partnering organizations will continue to nurture humanity rising in the firm conviction that somewhere in the recesses of the human psyche, we have what it takes to do what needs to be done. So thank you, everyone. It's now my pleasure to introduce my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who's become a much deeper friend than colleague over the years that we've been working together, and has been one of the pillars of Humanity Rising from near its inception. So Tom, thank you so much for all that you've done.
Yeah, it's been a true pleasure, Jim, and thank you. I was going back and looking and realizing that my first appearance was back on day 291, and I was here on day 500 and day 600, and now to be here again on day 800 is just, it's a joy, and it's been a wonderful journey. So thanks for the opportunity to be part of Humanity Rising and what we've been able to do over the last several years. So thank you. Absolutely delighted to have with us today Carol Pearson, Karen Wilhelm Buckley, and Alan Briskin, and of course my dear friend and colleague Shawne Mitchell, helping to bring more of the conversation around. I'll call it for appropriate reasons, the human journey. And we've had quite a journey this week, extraordinary panelists, and today is about the return, using Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey as a framework. And when we think about the return, and we'll get into it and explore it today, it's the return from our journey, from the belly of the whale, as we talked about yesterday, as a transformed person. Our consciousness has been shifted because of the journey. And we're seeing the world, or at least the invitation is to see the world with a new set of eyes. And I think about my own journey that I had, and we all, if we're lucky, we have multiple journeys throughout the course of our life. But if I think about my own personal journey coming out of a health illness that had me bedridden and unable to engage the world for about 4 years, I came out of that journey seeing the world in a different way, and with a whole new appreciation and understanding. But I didn't know how to operate in the world as that transformed conscious being that I was. And so I'll bring part of that into my questions today for our guests as we explore the return. So Shawne, welcome, and anything you want to share before we bring Karen in to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jim, and thanks all the panelists. And hello and welcome to our audience today. You usurp a lot of what I was going to share, but I will invite our audience to reflect on what they might consider to be in their return, their superpower, their gift, their boon, and perhaps maybe reflect also upon, what their definition, how they kind of consider the distinction of consciousness in conscious leadership. Is that increased awareness? Is that increased compassion? Is it an increased capacity to suspend judgment, and so on, those kinds of things. And in brief, yes, Monday we were all about the call, the refusal of the call, no, I don't want to go. Tuesday we talked about the departure and the archetypes and what does that feel like, and so on. And then yesterday we talked about initiation and the belly of the whale and the kinds of challenges, the shadows and so forth that will arise when we're in a state of transition. And so I'm very excited today, and will surrender back to you to introduce our panel and get started, because we really have an exemplary group here today. We're all experts on this really interesting subject.
Well, thank you, Shawne. And as I've said the last couple of days, it's been just a pleasure being able to work with you over the last several months to pull this off. So great to be kicking off day 4. So Karen, please join us. I think many of our viewers know Karen, and so I'll invite Karen to share any comments about yourself and the perspective you're bringing to our discussion today as you see fit.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you to Jim and the whole team. This is wonderful to return to Humanity Rising. I was just looking, Tom, in the history, the same as you were, day 72 was my first time on Humanity Rising. I convened a session, Mindsets for Change, Conscious Leaders Designing Meaningful Action Toward a Vital World. And we had a couple of those on August 1st in 2020 and September 5th in 2020. And we had, between those two, we had 8 different countries represented in the 12 women that were in the different panels. And exploring from their vantage point, their perspective, what conscious leadership meant for them. And I learned a ton. So that's really the place to start there. Wow, 800 Humanity Rising sessions. This is pretty exciting, I have to say. So the way I want to start speaking about this is the journey. This is a journey this week, and it's also a journey into conscious leadership. It's a journey into, and conscious leadership itself is a journey, because it's not something that we launch the journey and then we're there, right? The same as any initiation and return. Earlier this week, Jude Caravan and Heather Shea and yesterday Juliet, they spoke some about the initial beginnings, and Richard Page, the initial beginnings of the journey and what it's like to be called and what it's like to be drawn into a journey. And then the initiation and the process of struggle and chaos. 1980 for me was a big journey year, and I was thinking about this as I was reflecting on today. It was the year that I married Rick. It was the year that I launched Communicore Consulting, and it was a year that I spent several weeks in the Southwest with PEMDAS, learning shamanic practices. And I thought how those 3 have been integral threads in my journey throughout. I kept having the experience then, as I continue to, of higher power seeming to have a plan for me, rather than it being me having a plan for me. I was certainly a willing participant all the way along, but also not the doer as much as I was doing the doing, taking the steps, certainly. But I was not alone in the journey. All that is with me and was with me. My inner light would guide me when I would remember to listen. And I learned to take one step after another to reach out and connect within my community. One of the things that I learned in the Southwest was the importance of preparation for a journey, and to spend the time asking ourselves, why are we embarking on this journey? To be curious, even if it's a journey we've precipitously been taken into very quickly, to really pretty quickly clarify our intention of the embedded patterns that limit our freedom to take action on that which matters most to us, to really get clear on what it is that why it is we want to take this journey, what it is that we want to do. And the initiation is often different than we expect. Otherwise, it's not an initiation, actually. The initiation is a time to keep remembering that we're connected, that we're part of the collective, we're part of a circle, whether we remember it or not. There are people standing next to us, and there are people standing across from us, always. And then today we're focusing on the return, where we have come back out of the initiation, out of that internal experience of pivot, of shift, of change. And the key to the return is to get both feet on the ground while maintaining the trust in our heart, willing to be clueless as we take one step after another, because we can't know where we're going when we come back to the return. Otherwise, we wouldn't be somewhere new. Anais Nin said, we don't see things as we are. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. And the return is a key stage that marks the awakening of leadership potentials within each of us. So I'd like to share a PowerPoint with you just as a brief bit of context, since I'm the first speaker today. So let me come down and do a share screen. See if I can get this set up correctly here. And we'll go right there. There we go. Can you all see that? Great. So I love this quote by Hazel Henderson, which I think is part of the conversation that Shawne and Jim were having yesterday in yesterday's session. If we can recognize that change and uncertainty are basic principles, we can greet the future and the transformation we are undergoing with the understanding that we do not know enough to be pessimistic. I want to say that multiple times. If we are creating a new future, if we are living into a new future, we are not repeating the past. And who we've been and how we've been in the past is certainly part of the strengths that we bring forward, but it's not actually what our task is about. So the most important part of any journey I've ever been on is to welcome disturbance, to ask ourselves, are we repeating the past or are we creating a new future? And every time we feel disturbed, to stop, take a breath, and take a check. Am I disturbed because this is part of the creation process of a new future? Or am I disturbed because I'm hanging on to the past so fiercely that there's just like no way anybody's going to get my fingers to open at the moment? I wanted to say, we're talking about conscious leadership this week, and not much time has been spent on leadership. I have the simplest definition of leadership that I know, which is the willingness and ability to take action on that which matters most to you. There are leaders in every aspect of an organization. And when you have that willingness, when you bring your ability to bear and you trust that and you take action, then what happens is your authentic presence grows, your capacity to take steps, your capacity to work. Now, when you can bring consciousness into that, then you gain leverage because that conscious awareness is visible in how you act. It's also informs the choices that you make, because your consciousness is how you see yourself, others, and the world around you. It's the way we think, it's our inner state, it's our core intention. It's how we relate. Are we in connectedness? Or are we in separateness? Being a conscious leader is a perennial, perpetual practice of conscious awareness of self and of context, which I appreciated that Jim brought up. Because our context it has to do a lot with the frameworks that we operate inside of. And Heather Shea brought up the different definitions of hero and heroine. And I want to bring up the definitions of wisdom, because wisdom, as we know, is about exercising sound judgment or discernment in the choice of means and ends. Well, when I look in the dictionary a long time ago now, I think about 25, 30 years ago, I saw that a wise man is a man who is wise, a discreet or prudent man, well-versed in the affairs of the world. I looked in all kinds of dictionaries, and the only definition of a wise woman was a woman skilled in magic or hidden arts, a witch, sorceress, especially a harmless or beneficent one who deals in charms against disease. A conscious leader is somebody who we consider wise. So part of the journey that I hope we're all on is looking at who we consider wise and what it means to be conscious, and how our society has restricted our capacity to be fully present when we are operating inside these kinds of definitions that, consciously or not, shape who we bring in to a business discussion, who we bring in to carry something forward, how we have these conversations with one another. A little context for today is I think about that first stage as the ending. It's really the time where all of a sudden things end, things change. And then we move into the transition zone, which is the whitewater. There are waves that come our way that we had no idea how big those were going to be. And then we go into the new beginning. And like the butterfly, we are in that cocoon having no idea if our wings are strong enough to fly. That's part of our job. And I'm sure you probably all know that if we cut open a cocoon and kind of help the butterfly out because it looks like they're struggling, that their wings will come out weak and too wet. And it takes time. It takes time and energy to build strength and a capacity to move through the cocoon, to move through the return, and to keep bringing with us this transformed being who we've invited forward. I have found in working with clients as an executive coach and consultant for 43 years now, that it's important to distinguish the degree of change that we want to be involved in. A minor change modifies attitudes, behaviors, superficial systems without a major shift in perception. And we go through minor changes all the time. It doesn't raise a lot of heat in the system. A major change starts getting things hotter. We have to develop a new perspective to go through a major change. We begin acting in new ways, and we develop systems that drive or support that change. Occasionally, we have both the pleasure and the terror of a transformative change, a fundamental shift in our consciousness, our values or perceptions that significantly alters our behaviors and the systems that we're functioning inside of. And this is the last slide I'll bring for now, which is all three dimensions in the return need to change in concert. It's not just a matter of changing our consciousness, our beliefs, our attitudes, our ways of perceiving. Tom, as I'm sure you found when you just spoke of your journey, as I'm sure we've all found in our journeys, we have to change the structures, the systems and processes of our lives as well, our behaviors, our ways of acting. And there's a dynamic that occurs, of course, between the structures that are already in our lives and the way in which those direct or orient, those are the patterns and grooves of our lives that direct or orient the patterns and grooves in our consciousness, which direct and orient the patterns and grooves of our behavior, which reinforce our structure. And so if what we're doing is we're in the midst of making a change, then we are bringing that or bringing up questions about how we behave, about the structures of our lives and how we are going to both dismantle and reform or reshape those structures. And the hardest part of all, perhaps, is, of course, our beliefs, our attitudes, those things that are so deeply ingrained. So I will stop share at this point. I hope that was helpful context to get us started today. And I will turn it back over to you, Tom and Shawne. Thank you so much. And look forward to more dialogue.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. It's great content for the context of what we're talking about today, which is the return. So, Carol, I'd love to invite you in to share a bit more content for framing our dialogue today.
Carol, you're on mute.
I'm hitting unmute. Okay, here we go. First of all, I just want to appreciate Humanity Rising and this wonderful time together, and all the incredible panelists and organizers. Wow, I am honored to be here, of course. And I want to say what my perspective is. My perspective is that I'm a descendant of grandparents, all of whom came to Sweden from Sweden, lived in a bubble. My parents lived in a bubble until they moved to Texas, where I was born, and where we lived in a church where we went to the church all the time. And my parents were good kind of Christians. They taught me that God created everybody equal. And he said, and the worst thing I could be is racist, except the very worst thing I could be is anti-Semite. And so I married a Jew, because I trusted my parents, and all has worked out well. But I say that because I think because all of that, I was kind of confused in Houston, where I was growing up, between the rodeo and the church and my parents, and but these macho guys. And so I got hungry for learning. And I studied and studied and studied, and I kept getting degrees and doing all that kind of stuff. And I listened to Campbell and Jung, and I followed my bliss, and my bliss was to create a system that would be actually a hero's journey that would fit as well for women as for men. And so I gotta tell you about that, because this is, where else have I ever been asked to really focus on that before? But before that, I want to say something about what I see as the situation from my view in terms of the situation we are in right now. Because I'll be talking about ideas that I put together long ago, but telling you how I see them now. And I've also been paying a whole lot of attention to popular fiction and film, to pay attention, to notice where the culture is now. So as a woman, I'm very conscious about gender issues. And it doesn't take away from what other people have said the big issues are. I agree with everybody. But so I call to your attention the Academy Award winner, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And when I started seeing that, what I experienced is, oh yeah, that's a modern woman's life. She's running their business, which is a laundromat. She's locked in a situation where the past and the future are right there. She's about to do a party for a father who has not been that nice to her, who is a patriarch, and to honor him, and he expects to be honored. Her daughter has a girlfriend who's not just a girlfriend, and she's not used to that. And her husband seems to be never around, and she's in the midst of an audit. And of course, every in my country, we all hate the IRS. And so the villain is the IRS woman who is in charge of looking at her. And so she has everything all at once. And and as it goes on, she's beginning to connect up with multiple universes that help her with things that lives in other universes that she's experienced, which we could also see a central Jungian idea is that we have in our unconscious minds all the archetypes we're going to need. And so in a psychological way, we could see those as the different archetypes popping up. And by the end, all goes well. The party goes off well. She learns to appreciate her daughter's lover. And during this time, she has been very critical of her husband. And by the end, he's always been with her in all her other lives and all her other archetypes. And at the end, he's a kind of hero, and he says, she has an existential crisis, but all this has no meaning. And he says, yes, but we can be kind. And so based on this movie, or this movie as an illustration, I think we're actually in the return, leaving patriarchy to get back to a partnership society. And they end up partners with her. They're both appreciating one another. And the IRS villain becomes a pretty nice person. Okay. I think that's important because, one, to say that I think it's time and we need to leave patriarchy. We're not going to do all the rest of the things unless we do that. But that doesn't mean that we can't honor everything we've gained from patriarchy. But it also means we're a little bit destabilized. Everybody doesn't know their roles. And the key thing for men and women, it's like Barbie tells Ken, basically go find yourself. We all need to go find ourselves because we know the old ways. And we don't have to, at the end of a time, we don't have to, we will see what was bad about that time, but we don't have to hate anybody. We don't have to blame anybody. We need to go on with the task of now, which is being true to ourselves. So males and females. And I think in my experience, many of us, a whole lot of us are already there in terms of being on the journey. And in that sense, the patriarchy isn't about men, it's a system. So, and I'm going to go really quickly through my system of archetypes. And I want to mention to you that this system is being used all over the world. It's been widely translated in other countries where it is used, and also here at home. And what I know about that is it's a system of archetypes. And what all of us can know is that when we work with archetypes and when we talk from archetypes, the archetypes are bigger than we are. We have, they're universal stories, so that Carol Pearson, that's me, I can talk about an archetype, and in terms of my experience with it, and somebody in another country will have a very different experience, but the archetype will still work for them. And in the same way, the archetypes will work for somebody with a different gender than me, or a race. So like Campbell, I have 3 stages. The first one is just ordinary life. Excuse my throat here. Ordinary life, the archetypes that are very necessary are the innocent and the orphan. The innocent to have hope, and the orphan to see how to be realistic about everything that could go wrong. And the caregiver and the warrior. And the warrior's goal, what the warrior is here for, is to protect. And at this particular time, it's necessary that what is protected is this earth, and our relationship to this earth, and our relationship to one another. Nevertheless, the warrior can take us over in a form that has been very strong in patriarchy, which is war, which is, I'm noticing with the situation with Hamas and Israel, people are taking sides and deciding who to hate and who to blame. And in our politics at home and the culture war, they're doing that. And in the United States, we are one family, and we can't go ahead without all of us. And in the Middle East, that war started with Abraham. There are three religions came out of Abraham, according to the Bible, and also the Torah, and also in Islam. And unless we recognize that this is a family feud, it can't be solved. We need to come back together. The journey archetypes that I work with are the seeker and the lover, which that's following our bliss, and then not just following our bliss to explore and have adventures, but to find what we love, which leads to the lover. And right now, the challenge is for us to think well, to be careful what we wish for, to be careful what we desire, and then to go for it with all of our hearts. And then when we find what we love, to treasure that. I also believe that the lover is, I know that the lover is always very key to women, the heroine's journey. And that is for obvious reasons, in terms of that is during patriarchy, that's what we were charged with, to be the ones who loved and were loved. And very often the only power women had long ago is the power to entice and the power to evoke desire. And so just another movie very quickly. There's a scene in the movie Arrival where there are these huge, terrifying looking beings from outer space that have come, and they're in different parts of the world, and the military is all set up. And there's a professor of linguistics who's been asked to try to communicate with them. And nothing seems to be working, and everybody is terrified. And the military man wants to kill him. And she is all decked out with protective gear. There's a translucent barrier between her and where some of them are. She's not making any progress. And what she does is she takes off all the protective gear, walks over to that translucent barrier and puts up her hand. And one of these weird looking creatures responds with a tentacle. And then they can talk. More on her later. But the courage, of course, of the lover archetype is to be known and to know and to be naked. I mean, to show up, which is a lot of the times how we get peace around the world. The other two in the journey are really much more related to, the creator and the destroyer. And the creator, of course, is the world we create by the choices we make. And the destroyer is sometimes that's really where initiation comes in, where we are destroyed from the outside. That is, we're brought down, and we've already talked about that. But it's also sometimes when we are destructive, and it is also at our times when we just need to let go of something. And as I'm talking about this, I just want to stress, to let go of something is not to have to hate it, not to have to fight it. just to say its time has passed and I'm ready to move on. And then the actual archetypes of the return in my system are first the ruler and the jester. And by the way, they're all for the characters in the medieval court, which are very archetypal. We have the ruler, of course, is for each of us, it's the capacity to take charge of our own lives and get out of complaining about everybody else and move into saying, I have to make my choices given the world as it is, and I want it to be. And, but it is also an evolved ruler is clearly part of a community and feeling the oneness, and knowing what can I do from here. And it's not so much what can I change, make it change, but how can I notice the changes in progress? How can I notice the organic changes? One of the books that I've written is about the Persephone rising, and a lot of times the story about Demeter and Persephone, and Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, and as well as being seen as a mom, and she's kind of a ruler mom, but she's also she solves the problem of getting her daughter back from being abducted to the underworld by making the plants stop growing. And that's what's happening now, you know. There is a force that is making the plants not grow and all kinds of other things. Our soil is depleted. And much of the answer for the ruler right now is to make organic change, to think like nature in how we do things. Please forgive me, by the way, I have a little throat thing going on. The jester is balance to the ruler who tends to take him or herself too seriously, and they can lighten up and make it fun and make life fun, and also go with the flow a bit without trying to control everything. And then the last two archetypes are the sage, which in our time is paying attention to science and the new sciences. And so many of you have already been thinking about in the world right now about what are the implications of what we know about this giant universe we live in. And we're on this small planet. And what do we do with that? And how do we care for it? And how do we care for one another? And the balance for that archetype is the magician. And so many of the panelists have been talking about essentially magician archetype activities, healing. And we're in a process of massive healing going on right now, but also expanding consciousness to be able to see the bigger, to think like the universe and think big. And in the film I mentioned Arrival, what that professor who is a linguist learns as she learns the language of these other creatures, she starts to be able to see the future and the past, and she has memories of a child that she will not have until later in her life. And she keeps the military from killing these wonderful creatures who've come to help us on this planet. by telling him what she knows, his dying wife, what her last words were. And her last words were, "In war, there's no winning. There's only widows." And that kind of expanded consciousness I've been hearing from the panelists in this whole time. And it is something that any of us can have by doing various meditative processes, by consciously seeing ourselves and feeling ourselves, not just thinking of ourselves, but feeling ourselves in a huge web of human and earth and cosmic life. And I've gone on too long, so I'll pass this on.
Thank you, Carol. Alan, can we bring you in to share a bit more content so we can get into the dialogue?
Thank you, Tom. Let's just take a breath. That's a lot of information. Be aware of your breath a couple times. Feel your feet on the ground. Maybe move your shoulders around. Just get into your body. I'm grateful to be here. It's good to be with you all. I took the approach after initially starting to talk with Tom of what if I didn't know a lot about the hero's journey? And specifically, what if I didn't know a lot about the return? How would the world show me some things that might be worth talking about? And so I just held that question, what is the hero's journey? What is the return as part of that cycle? And in the last month, 3 things, showed themselves that I'm going to talk about. One is, what is the return and the hero's journey through the eyes of immigrants to the United States? And my personal connection to that is my parents both came as children from Lithuania. In their case, escaping the rise of the Nazis and leaving for their own self-protection. The second, through the eyes of neuroscience and neurobiology. What are we learning about well-being and flourishing that the hero's journey and the return can show us something? And finally, through the eyes of Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama, because, given Tom's request, what is the relationship of leadership and consciousness? And what is it that we might learn from them? And specifically from a documentary that was recently released about their friendship and their dialogues with each other over a period of 30 years. So that's where I'm going to take us. And I'll start with a program that was held just a few weeks ago, honoring Asian American business people who had come from Asia. And it was hosted in part by a colleague of mine who is from India, came from India. And my colleague summarized what he thought was a relatively common experience among the immigrants he spoke with. And he didn't actually use the language of hero's journey. But when I looked at what he summarized, you can see significant elements of that cycle. So first there was a quest, a quest being a purpose. In my own family, it was to get out. For others, it was to start a new life, to get an education. But there was some purpose behind the energy of the quest. And then there was the shift, which is that they had to leave someplace to go to a new place, in this case, the United States. But they had to educate themselves. They had to learn a new language. My parents didn't speak English when they came. And then they faced the challenge, which is so much part of that hero's journey. They came from nothing, as my parents did, and they had to find a way to deal with a dominant white culture. They had to find a way to deal with having limited resources. And then begins the transformation. And as Tom said, the return is partly about that transformation, but the transformation begins during the cycle. It begins by having, in my colleague's words, walking a divergent path, a non-linear path. You don't get there in the traditional ways. There are synchronicities, there are things that you could never have expected. And that brings us to the allies. So that I think it would be very few people who come from an immigrant background who are not aware that they had relatives, friends, mentors, people who saw something in them and gave them opportunities. And so then you get to one way to think about the return, which is my colleague talked about the legacy that people leave. It could be the support of their children to be able to further integrate into the society, or it could be their own business achievements. So that legacy becomes part of our understanding of return, that we are generative, that we have given something back for all the gifts, including the hardships that we've been given. Now, using the context of what we've all been saying today, we might say this is a major change, but not always a transformational change. There may not be an entire shift of consciousness, but there's clearly the return has to do with grasping that we've achieved something that is in service of others. And so that sort of lets me shift my gears, if you will, to an article that appeared in Scientific American last month. And here you pick up the same themes. The title of the article in Scientific American was "To Lead a Meaningful Life, Become Your Own Hero." And once again, without necessarily going into the details of the hero's journey, it picks up the different themes that in our lives we have to overcome many challenges. That failure is part of that journey. That it took great effort to reach where we are. And that in the end, we have done some good, especially for others. And the point in Scientific American is when we begin to link these elements together, something changes in the very neurobiology of our bodies. We begin to feel a release. We begin to feel a lifting of depression. We begin to feel lighter. We become re-energized. And specifically by that ability that can be learned to restory ourselves. I think all of us on this panel have had to practice that, to be able to move from challenge and failure and despair at times, to restory our lives so that we could see there is something else that is happening in the midst of all these other things that are going on. And so the return is about flourishing. It's about healing. It's about knowing that we all go through this cycle together, and that the consequence of that is a certain empathy and ability to see others as we see ourselves. Which then brings me to the stories of Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama, because I think in this example, they're really talking about a return that has to do with humanity rising. For those who know a little bit of the story, the Dalai Lama was chosen at 2 years old to be the next Lama. He was presented with the challenge of China coming into Tibet. He fled under bombs falling in his 20s and had to build a new life in India. Desmond Tutu grew up in South Africa under apartheid. His father was a very loving man, but who was quite violent when drunk. and he had to live in the context of that family tragedy and the larger social tragedy of apartheid. I'm going to refer to 4 stories or parts of that film that I think are about the gifts of the return. The first is what Tutu says about his friendship with the Dalai Lama, which takes place over 30 years, and ends. Desmond Tutu died in 2021 at 89. Dalai Lama is still alive at 88. And so their words really carried for me a sense of what could I still see of the return while they were still here and able to speak of their own experience. This is what the Tutu says about his friendship with the Dalai Lama. It just happened. Scientists will come afterwards and analyze it. But I don't think that he woke up and said, I think I'm going to be friends with that large-nosed black man from Africa. I think it was a communication of the heart. When we kept quiet, our hearts discovered that they were kindred spirits. So for me, his words reached in, and it made me think that it's not all in our words and our mind. It's when we quiet the mind that the heart awakens. So it's a different way of being with each other. And I think it is one of the gifts of the return, that we realize that we don't solve things just with our mind. The second story is what Tutu's daughter says about the two of them. And she accompanied them throughout those decades. She says, I wouldn't want to be their 3rd grade teacher. When they're together, they're constantly mischievous, teasing each other, laughing. And I think that is one of the gifts of the return, that we understand that gravitas, the heaviness of the world we face, must be met with levitas, with a certain lightness of spirit, especially in the darkest of times. We need friendship, we need laughter, we need curiosity to lighten the way and lighten the burden. The third scene that touched me was they were together in a school in India for Tibetan children who had escaped Tibet and were separated from their families. And they're each talking about the challenge that they went through. And the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu are just listening. And a young girl, maybe about 11, talks about having been separated from her parents at 5 to reach India. And she just begins to weep. And you see the 2 men, Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama, just sort of being present. And then after a little bit of time, the Desmond Tutu, his face just softens with such a look of love. And he just says, sorry. And then there's another quiet period. And the Dalai Lama instructs her. He tells her to be present, that in her being present, there will be freedom. And that now she has the opportunity to study not only modern things, but about her ancient culture. And he says, if you look at it this way, you'll feel okay. And I'm listening and I'm thinking, there's a real difference between the two of them, and that I felt a little bit like the Dalai Lama was almost lecturing a little bit. And then Dalai Lama's interpreter gives some context. And he says the Dalai Lama knows that he's a beacon for his people. He knows that he's seen as a protector. And so he offers encouragement where Desmond Tutu offers comfort. And I thought here was another lesson of the return, that we all show up differently. We all have different gifts to offer. And whether we're offering comfort or encouragement, we are supporting a next generation to cope with the world that they're facing. The final theme, I think, in the film is the question of joy. And the subtitle of the film is Finding Happiness in Troubled Times. And the Dalai Lama does something that I love. When he needs to, he says, "Oh, my English isn't very good." And maybe not, but he seems fine. But he says, I don't really know what the word joy means. I think of it as the satisfaction of a meaningful life. I mean, the satisfaction of a meaningful life. That on the return, we are aware that the most important things is not chasing happiness. It's not the things that are external to us. It's living who we are and the gifts that we have to lead a meaningful life. And so I'm just going to summarize these points and then lead us into, for Shawne to lead us into discussion. But it's just to repeat the lessons that I took from the return. That when we quiet the mind, the heart awakens. Especially in the darkest times, we need friendship, laughter, and curiosity to light the way and lighten the burden. Each of us demonstrates caring and compassion in different ways, providing both comfort and encouragement. And that joy is the reward for giving joy to others. Thank you. Take it away, Tom and Shawne.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Kieran. Carol, please come back on screen. And when I have been listening to the three of you this morning and reflecting on what we've been hearing throughout the week, the extraordinary wisdom that has been brought to the conversations, I'm in some ways at a loss as to where to take the conversation. And yet, Karen, something you shared about transformational change, and Alan, you touched on it as well. I think that might be a good place for us to start. Humanity, as Jude Curvon mentioned to us on Monday, has an evolutionary impulse that we're responding to, whether we're conscious of it or not. And we're in this time by necessity of going through a transformational change. And we all have been on our own human journey. And we're finding ourselves at this time where we're being called, demanded, required to go through a transformational change as a species. And so I just want to frame that and just ask each of you what's alive for you in this moment in that context. And please,
Alan,
whoever's ready,
Alan,
just jump in.
Okay, Alan, you looked ready to respond. Do you want to?
No, I'm I'm happy to have someone else start us rolling.
Okay. All right. Carol, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, Alan reminded me of the heart, and I live there. But I forget it sometimes when I want to get into information. That I think one, I feel reassured by what I see in the next generation. I've got grandkids, I've got, of the future. I see them in some ways knowing what to do and standing on our shoulders. And I also know that part of the task is is actually thinking and feeling at the same time, and loving this planet, loving each other, and feeling maybe a little excitement about what could be, what is to unfold that we could never expect.
What will unfold that we can never expect? I'll build on that if I can, because that's part of the consciousness that we're developing, isn't it? Is to warm ourselves, to warm our hearts to that which is unfolding, which we could never expect, and to simultaneously lead in whatever way is ours to lead, and know nothing, know something. Respond from that. When I work with leaders, I work with 5 different levels of consciousness. And one of those is that individual sensing, that capacity to find the rest inside the self and sense the body and the wisdom that's there in the heart. And when our hearts are closed or open, I work with transcendent knowing. I don't always call it that, but in terms of them accessing intuition and understanding the archetypes that are driving them. I love your archetypes, Carol, and found it was wonderful to refresh them today. To open their mind to global thinking and taking in the mess of the world and the way that the different aspects of what's going on in the world all impinge upon each other, and really intractable messes that we can find leverage points and can find our place where there's something for us to do. And the 4th one is collective acting, and that's what I heard Jim calling for this week again and again. And that is a level of consciousness that is a challenge. It's one thing to be developing our consciousness internally and welcoming that which we don't know and moving into and creating a new future, but to do so collectively is a level of consciousness that we are challenged to develop. I'm certainly challenged to develop. And at the same time, doing all of that and creating effective results is, a way to feel a little simultaneously exhilarated and crazy, I guess. And it's just a really good thing we're in community as we're doing this. I'm just in the process of writing a blog on those levels of consciousness, and it's just got me intrigued what we're up against.
As I'm listening, I think part of the stories of the hero's journey is we get a cape or a sword or a lantern. We get something that we take with us into the cave. And it strikes me that there is one kind of story, which is the more the world's coming to an end, the greater the opportunity is to change it. And that's reassuring to a degree, and we could keep reminding people how we keep moving closer to really the elimination of the human species in order to create the heat to think about the kind of transformation that's needed. But that's still a little bit intellectual for me. It's a little bit heady. And what I know more about is what it takes to go through troubled times. It really takes our ability to watch, to witness our minds moving into the egoic state of fixing things. So the reminder is that we have to keep coming back into our own bodies. And as uncomfortable as that sometimes can be, it's the necessary way to encounter the challenges that we're going to face. The second is that we need to really be attentive to what is arising among us. It's one thing to talk about collective wisdom. It's another to be aware in the present moment of what's arising among us. To slow things down if needed. to find a mosaic of solutions that can sort of address different things. I work inside hospitals, and there's one colleague who is always ending by saying, okay, so what's the next step? What's the next thing we have to do? And we're dealing in the hospital settings, with COVID, with all kinds of different challenges. And we talk in big terms, but then what's the next step? So I think it's these kinds of skills, not final answers, that this period of time is asking of us.
Yeah, and in responding to what this period of time is asking of us, Alan, you've got a new book coming out on fields, and Heather spoke earlier this week to tapping into and developing her intuitive abilities. I'd like to bring that part of the conversation to the audience, just talking about fields and what's in the fields and how do we access it? How do we be open to what is present and available for each of us on the planet? And I would just be really curious to hear from each of you, and your how are you paying attention? What are you noticing? What's present? Alan, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. I use the word field with my co-author, Mary Jelinas, with the idea that it's the milieu, it's the setting that we're in and often unconscious of and unaware of. And that there are personal fields that we're unconscious of, how my heart is beating, how I am moving, I talked about earlier, to solution thinking as opposed to being present. There are social fields, which is the history of the interactions that we find ourselves in, and the history and presence of the social field itself. Carol gave voice to that in talking about Barbie and about the patriarchal field, that those are we're always within those kinds of larger social fields. It's why the archetypal work is so important, because it reminds us of patterns that have gone through history. And then there are noetic fields, which is a reference point to higher consciousness, to nous, to the Greek word that meant a self-regulating cosmic intelligence, and that each of us has some bit of stardust, some part of memory of that self-organizing cosmic intelligence. And so we're writing, Mary and I, on fields to remind us that there are these interactive fields that are constantly woven together.
I would add just one bit to that. I love the distinctions that you and Mary are making, Alan, and people are asking where they can get your book. So I'll say it's still in development, but we all look forward to it very much. The other aspect that the field that I keep paying attention to right now is, am I in a field of separateness or am I in a field of connectedness? Oh man, is that a practice? Like every minute, every day, am I in a field of connectedness or am I in a field of separateness? And some days it's really easy to connect with the quince outside my office window, or the beautiful trees, the huge oak trees around here. Where else can I connect? Where else am I actually naturally connected? Because it's in our nature to be connected.
That's beautiful.
And as leaders, how do we strive forward and take the steps that are ours to take and do what we need to do and be connected, not go into the old archetype of the hero where we're out there on our own. That's just past. It's done. It's gone. It doesn't work anymore. So how do we shift that field from separateness to connectedness? I think one of the ways we do that is this practice internally. Yeah.
How about for you, Carol?
Sorry, go ahead, Carol.
I would add what you're both saying in terms about particularly the field of connectedness. I tend to be in a field of, I like a field of connectedness around joy and happiness and how wonderful it's going to be. But in my last few years, and my husband had 3 surgeries, and I was called to be really caregiving, and there was other illnesses in my family, some of which everybody, at one point, several people moved in my house. And very recently, right before this, which is, I have a American who's also Israeli staying with us because he didn't have another place to stay, and a woman fleeing domestic violence. And so in my personal life, and I'm writing about America and thinking about enslavement and genocide, and I'm feeling called by synchronicity to connectedness more and more all the time, not necessarily with the whole world, but it's in things that remind me of the great suffering that has always happened, and it is happening now, and the great courage that is also there. All the people who've made it through, so that get out of my pout and be there for whatever is calling me.
Many of you know that 19 months ago, Rick had a stroke. My beautiful husband had a stroke. And in that journey of the last 19 months has been this opportunity to open our hearts to ever more connectedness with all the wonderful people that have showed up in all the ways they have, but also between us. You know, it's a whole different kind of connectedness. We're not both moving through the world doing our thing. Yeah, just there was something you said, Carol, that I was thinking about how somebody in the chat earlier said how important in the dark times is community. And you've just invited community into your home, Carol. It's just
well, and I can talk abstractly about partnership society, whatever, but it all change starts with one-on-one. We're having that too, closer. We're all closer. And it does start with that field, Ellen, that you would talk about a relation of being fully with another human being, and being able to then move from, I can do it with this person, and I can do it with that person, and I can do, and learning the capacity to actually do it, not intellectually do it, but actually do it with more and more people.
I was going to also share that for myself, I feel that it has a lot to do with intention. And that when I have an intention to connect with even if you want to call it distinctive fields, it really, for me, boils down to an intention, whether it's an intention to access a certain frequency or an intention to access a field or an intention to access connectivity. And I think of one little quick story that was maybe, now over 15 or more years ago with my oldest son. He was 22, I think, at the time. And this little event became so validating about this field. And he and I were driving from Santa Barbara to Santa Fe. And I had a new car. It was zipping along, and he's in the passenger seat, and we're on a long drive, and he's got a pillow. We brought a sleeping pillow, and he's up against, the window in a snooze while I'm zipping along. And I started to vibe him silently. I love you. I love you. You're so awesome. You're so great. I love you so much. His name's Travis. And a few minutes into this, his arm reaches out to pet me. So much is spoken in the silence, like you said. And I, in my mind, we're not talking because he's kind of asleep. And I'm like, oh, this works. This works. This, it's got a little humor to the story, but I was so like, this is real. This works. I just wanted to share intention.
Yeah.
I feel when I'm in tension in a frequency that I want to have a spirit just show up in Shawne in silence, and hope that compelling, safe frequency softens someone else's heart. Intention.
Yeah,
Just that all of these stories are really touching and beautiful, and I want to connect the idea of intention to fields. And intention may be one of those swords or lanterns that helps us in the dark. And your story is so compelling in part because I think that it's when intention is embodied, it becomes alive. And so kind of visually, his reaching out and putting his arm, that now the intention was in his body and in your body, and something is happening in that field when our bodies are connected along with our hearts and our minds.
I want to invite Jim back into help us close out the program today. And I'll share more in a moment, but just Jim, welcome back.
Thank you. What a marvelous discussion. I was just sitting here feeling increasingly warm-hearted about really the dazzling way that you all have commented on conscious leadership. I think one place that I'd like to start, I think, Karen, you were making a very insightful point that, in the end, we're making choices about connection or disconnection, all day, and in decisions that seem completely disconnected from that dynamic, we're still making choices that bring us closer to ourselves and authenticity and further away. And what was rising within me as you were saying that is, the increasing disconnection that our society through social media and world events and all kinds of contributing factors is experiencing, particularly around loneliness. And there's now a minister of loneliness in Great Britain and other countries around the world as isolation becomes the norm, even as the human race is becoming more and more overpopulated. So you have this extraordinary contradiction between proximity and internet connection and all kinds of connectivity that's happening all around, and people's increasingly acute, distressing sense of isolation and disconnection. So I just wanted to accentuate that insight and just see how each of you would kind of respond to this growing malaise in our world from the point of view of conscious leadership, because I think it's something that's up, not just for Americans and not just for Europeans, but for Asians and Africans. This is a global phenomenon that we're dealing with to a large degree, motivated by the social media. You had said earlier, Karen, about consciousness, behavior, and structure. It's as if the structures of our world are mitigating against, Alan, you keep raising embodiment. That's absolutely true. And yet the structures are taking us away from our bodies and away from those very dynamics that build community, authenticity, purpose, and intention. So I just wanted to get your comments on that.
We have another hour, right?
As we close.
I have an example, of paying attention, the leadership paying attention. Erickson is finding out with elderly people, they do better if they're clustered together and they start doing their own laundry and cleaning. Young people are starting to create community. People who are lonely are looking out. We can't underestimate the fact that everybody is seeing that as a problem and beginning to address it.
The leaders in the organizations that I work with are seeing it a problem. New hires are disconnected. They are lacking connection to the corporation, which we had 20, 30 years ago. And they're also lacking connection. A lot of their community is virtual rather than in person. And so even the small companies are building in more opportunities for authentic, really juicy connection, so that loneliness in that simplest level begins to find an extension. But I concur, Jim, it's a bigger conversation. It's around the world and it's everywhere. And it's to be explored.
I just want to amplify and affirm what we're hearing. You know, Karen earlier talked about this basic premise of a field. Do we see ourselves as connected or not? And if unconsciously we don't, then we try to create ways to fix the problem, which make the problem worse. Social media in some ways is a consequence of something that was already happening. And this gave people a way to connect, but in a way that was not emphasizing the things you just pointed to. You know, the warm heart, the embodied state, the consciousness of connectedness Carol spoke of in her own home. So in some ways, in the spirit of the next step is for us to not be swept into that larger field, which is disconnecting us. The next step is to be embodied, to be present, to be heartfelt, to bring humor, to bring what our gifts are for comfort and encouragement. Because what you're pointing to is a consequence of a larger field that's been moving toward disconnection and then trying to fix it with the same consciousness that created it.
Shawne, do you have any comment? And then Tom, why don't you close us out?
My comment would piggyback on what Alan just said, and to more or less quote him, being thoughtful about bringing our gifts to the world. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Shawne. Yeah, that's Jim.
Yeah, thank you all. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's integrated so much of where we've journeyed over the course of the week. It's a reflection of the wisdom of the return, the wisdom of the journeys that each of you have been on, and thank you for bringing your gifts to the dialogue today. So a huge thank you. And to those of you watching us, tomorrow we have an extraordinary show, which is bringing together so many of the voices from the week to be in dialogue with each other. And so we've had the richness of each of the programs, but tomorrow will be the culmination of all of it. So encourage all of you to be with us again tomorrow for an extraordinary conversation.
I'd add, bring your questions too. What have you? It was some of your reflections from the week, questions from the week. What's come up for you? share them with us. And I think that that'd be really great fodder for the dialogue.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Shawne, Alan, Carol, Karen. This has been a marvelous, marvelous contemplation of the return. And I think all of us are deeply inspired and appreciative of the wisdom that you all have been bringing. That will bring us to a close for today. We'll see you all tomorrow for our final session. Those of you who can join the after chat, you'll see the link in the chat box, those of you who are on the Zoom. And for all of you others who are watching passively, you received a Zoom link in your Zoom reminder about this call. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.